Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So welcome. My name is Nathan Drew. I'm a principal software engineer here at the DiSTI Corporation, and with me I have Brandon Griffin, a software engineer 3 here at the DiSTI Corporation. And today we're going to go over all of the great new features that have just been released with our latest version of GlStudio, GlStudio 8.2. So before we get into today's webinar material, we'll go ahead and start with a quick introduction of DiSTI for those of you who are not in the know. So we've been around for a while. The DiSTI Corporation is a software company. We were originally established back in 1994. And the GlStudio product was originally released back in the year 2000, and it was developed as a tool for creating photorealistic cockpit trainers. So now here, over 20 years later, we have many years of experience in HMI solutions in both in simulation, embedded, and safety critical. To give you an idea of how widely we and our GlStudio tool are used, here are just a few of our customers in a variety of industries ranging everywhere from aerospace and defense to automotive, outer space, medical, trains, agriculture, and more. GlStudio is widely used in production, both of embedded and safety critical embedded applications. So for example, at Hyundai Mobis, GlStudio is used in a variety of different HUDs, clusters, and IVIs throughout a wide variety of different car models. Jaguar Land Rover standardized on GlStudio for 9 years for IVIs across all of their vehicle models. And then on the safety critical side, we are used in a variety of aircraft, including in many cases, including the simulators and ground stations for those aircraft. We at DiSTI regularly collaborate with our partners, as no production system is ever built in isolation. And we partner across disciplines, including but not limited to OS and RTOS providers, hardware vendors, purveyors of graphics drivers, and all kinds of different user space software. So with that being said, let's dig into today's webinar material. So here in GlStudio 8.2 that we just released this month, we have these headlining features: the GUI testing framework, the best practices workflows videos, improved 4K monitor support, and some returning features, including the restoration of iOS platform support and restoration of FlexNet publisher support. And like in all of our releases, we always try to pack in as many bug fixes, quality of life improvements, package updates, and more. And GlStudio 8.2 does not disappoint. So our first feature that I will go over in live demo will be the GUI testing framework. Something to keep in mind as we are going through this webinar material. Please feel free to leave any questions you may have about these features, or really any question about GlStudio that you may have in the chat. So up in your top toolbar, there should be a little button called Q&A, and you can go ahead and start leaving questions there. And when we get to the end of the webinar, we will answer any questions that may have queued up. And so as soon as you think of something, please feel free to add your question to that list. So that being said, let's go over this first feature, the GUI testing framework. And this is perhaps our headlining feature of GlStudio 8.2. And the GUI testing framework is a way for you, the user, to out of the box test your GlStudio applications. And this can be very important to help increase your confidence that the changes that you're making to your GlStudio application are not breaking any previous functionality. So this is great for saving time during the release cycle. And like I said, increasing your confidence that when you're making your release that you're not breaking something important. So we've implemented this GUI testing framework in a front end and a back end. The front end is available to you in the GlStudio editor, and it has 2 customized tabs that will show up in the editor for you. And one of these is the GUI testing editor. which you can see an example over to the left, and the GUI testing results. So the GUI testing editor allows you to define a list of test steps that will exercise your application, doing things like changing property values, injecting mouse and keyboard events, as well as recording screenshots that can be compared in your baseline to see whether or not your application behaved the way it did before. And then the other tab is the GUI testing results, which will show you every single property in your entire application that changed as a result of a test step. So for example, if you have a mouse click on something, the GUI testing results will show you every single property of every single object that changes a result. And you can ensure that those changes did not change between test runs, that you're getting consistent, verifiable, consistent results. So this GUI testing framework is available as a GLStudio package, and it will be available in your package manager, and it is included with the GLStudio 8.2 install by default. So you can just go into your projects and add them, which I will show you how to do momentarily. So that's what the GUI testing framework is supposed to do. And now I'm going to go over to my other PC, and I'm going to show you how to create your own test using the DiSTI GUI testing framework. So let's go ahead and do that. So switching over, I actually have a Mac OS PC hooked up via a capture card setup. So over here on my other PC, I have this cockpit tutorial, and this is what I'm going to be using to demonstrate the GUI test framework. So in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to test one of the MFDs in this cockpit. So this particular cockpit, I'm just going to show you it running real quick. This is actually the end result of our cockpit tutorial. This is actually part 4 of a cockpit tutorial. So if you go through our full aerospace cockpit tutorial, that will show you step by step on how to create all the functionality that you see here. So it's a very good way of getting started with GLStudio if you're not already familiar. So the way that this works is you have a 3D cockpit, and whenever you click on an instrument inside the scene, the camera will move to that instrument, and then you'll be able to interact with that instrument. So for example, I clicked on the circuit breakers, so that brings you there, and when you click on the back button, it brings you back. So I'm going to write a quick test that tests clicking on the left MFD and making sure that it will properly zoom in on that left MFD. And that's going to be it for this test. So write a test. If your project already includes the GUI testing framework, you will see this button at the very top toolbar called Open GUI Test Editor. If you do not see that button, then you'll want to go to the Manage Packages, and then you'll want to type in GUI to look for the GUI test framework, and then add that to your project by clicking on this button to make it active. Then hit Apply. That will add the package to your project, and then it will prompt you to restart the editor and say yes. Once you do that and the editor restarts, then the GUI test editor will be present. So then all you need to do is then open the GUI test editor, and you can see here we have no tests and we have no test steps. So let's go ahead and add a new test, which we will call MFD test. So now we have a test, but we don't have any test steps. So we need to add some test steps. So let's go ahead and just add a couple test steps. So first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take an image of the starting point of our application. So we'll go ahead and change one of these test steps to take one of these test steps and change it to screenshot capture. So whenever one of these is triggered, it will trigger a trigger a capture of the screenshot, which will be saved for your baseline for comparison. We're going to call this initial. So essentially what we have in our test so far is we're going to call calculate, which will refresh the application and cause the screen to redraw, and then we're going to immediately take a screenshot. The way that you run your test is very similar to just running your application. So when you click on the run button here in the deployments, this will generate, compile, and run your application without running the test. But if you want to run the test, all you have to do is click this test run button and then click run. which will then trigger both the application to run and the test to be executed. So you can see that that went really quickly because all we did was take a single screenshot. We look at our test results. So this is the test results button. You can see that there is the singular screenshot, and you can see these various steps that we haven't quite filled in yet. So that's essentially the workflow for writing a test. Is you continue making changes to your test list, and then you see the results here in the testing results. So simply taking a screenshot is not that interesting. So we're going to make things a little bit more complicated. We're going to do what we intended to do, and that is to zoom in on this MFD. So to do that, we're going to need to simulate a mouse click. So I'm going to need to select a mouse click from this list. And then here I'm going to want the MFD left object, which you can see we have autocomplete here, and I'm going to select an object that's inside that MFD. Background bright is just a polygon that's in the center of that object. And you can see that some of these tests have other settings, and you can tell that by this button, because one of the things we're going to want to set is we're going to want to make sure that we're doing a left click so that we actually navigate. So that will now do a click right here on that left MFD, and then we're going to need to wait for the application to do the camera animation. So we're going to need to wait for 2 seconds for it to start, and another 2 seconds for it to finish. And then we'll go ahead and copy and paste this test step, Command or Control CV, and then we're going to get the screenshot of it zoomed in on the MFD. So MFD zoom seems like a reasonable thing to call that. So this should now do what we did before while also zooming in on the MFD and getting a screenshot of that. So let's give this a shot. So same as before, run the test and then run our application. And we should see initial state, beginning to zoom in, zoomed in, and then done. So back to our test results. We can see that we now have a lot more test results. You can see all the different property changes that happened. These are marked as X because we don't currently have a baseline saved. But if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, we'll see that we now have a screenshot, and that screenshot is of the zoomed in MFD. So now let's go ahead and save a baseline. So to do that, we're going to click the Save As button, and we're going to save this test results that we just made as our baseline for comparison. And we're going to call this just Mac OS. So now that we hit OK, now we have a baseline, and you can see, well, yeah, of course they match because we just saved this as a new baseline. So all these different properties, you can now see these are checkboxes because they all match exactly what we just saved. So let's do some more changes. I've noticed that there's actually quite a bit of noise as far as changes, value changes over here, and that is because the application is currently ramping through test values. So I think for this test, we're going to want to turn those off so that we only get the changes that we want to see for the zoom. That is the camera, all the camera properties that change when we zoom. So let's go ahead and use a value set in our test to turn those testing values off. So let's go ahead and duplicate this test step, and let's make a value set, and let's turn the different testing properties of the application off. So testing will be our property name, and then over here in the new value, we can set that to 0, false. And then we can duplicate this 2 more times to disable the testing property for the MFDs. So MFD left dot testing and MFD right dot testing. And because I duplicated these, they all have the same value of false. So now when I run this test, I'm going to get different results. I should get the same screenshots, but all these different value changes that are as a result of ramping values should no longer appear. So let's see if that happens. I'm going to hit the run button again and run my application. We should essentially get the same, like I said, the same screenshot results, but the value changes should be greatly reduced. And the very astute observer will have noticed that this MFD is the tape is vertical rather than slightly angled because the ramping values were not running. So now you can see that we're getting different test results and our test failed, quote unquote. So in this case, we know that we intended to make these changes, so we'll simply hit save baseline, and now our baselines match again. And you can see now that we have a lot less value changes, and all these value changes have to do with the camera, the moving eye object, its location, its field of view, and its clip values. Cool. So that's a basic test. So how would you know if there was a regression in your application? So we're going to introduce a regression just to show an example of what that might look like and how this testing apparatus might catch it. So in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that there was a bug introduced that disabled the airspeed tape. So I went ahead and just turned the visibility off. So if that were to happen, what would happen in the test results? So we're going to go ahead and rebuild and rerun the application like that. So you can see it's the same as before, except there's no airspeed tape. So obviously in our test results, we're going to get a failure, as we would expect. So you can see that the screenshots don't match. The camera works as normal because that didn't change. And you can see that, let me make this bigger so it's easier to see. When you hover over a screenshot that has failed inside the test results, there we go, that's better. So if you hover over it, it will show a delta between what the expected result was and what you actually got. And you can see that it's very visually obvious that, hey, in fact, it is the airspeed tape that's missing. And if you hold down the mouse button on top of it, it will hold it in the delta image. So you can see exactly what changed. And if you scroll up, it's a little bit harder to see, but you can see that it's also the airspeed tape that has changed. So from there, you can simply fix your application, or you can decide that this new baseline is actually correct, and you can save over the existing baseline. So that is the GUI testing framework in a nutshell. It's a very powerful out-of-the-box way of having confidence that your GLStudio application is working exactly as intended. Okay. So highly recommend giving that a try in GLStudio 8.2. So for our next feature, we have improved 4K monitor support. So one of the main features in the editor that's gotten a drastic improvement in the 8.0 series in particular is editor support on high resolution monitors. So essentially what this means is if you try to use the operating system settings for zoom or scale on applications for GLStudio, that GLStudio behaves a whole lot better than it did before. Mainly the icons and the text scale appropriately now. So if you had given GLStudio, previous versions of GLStudio a try on a 4K monitor, but was not satisfied with how it worked, now's the time to give that another try. I think you'll be very satisfied with how it works now. So this improved support applies to the editor on all platforms that the editor is supported on, Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. So please give that a try if you are using a 4K monitor when you download 8.2. Next up, we have iOS platform support. So a little bit of history behind this. So GLStudio has supported iOS for a very long time. And actually, in fact, iOS was the very first platform our ES code generator supported back in the day. So long story short, us writing a new iOS deployment is kind of just a follow-on of all the work we were doing when we originally introduced GLStudio for macOS back in GLStudio 8. So the old workflow before we had an editor on macOS was a little bit of a pain, which is why we had dropped iOS support back in the GLStudio 6.x series. But now that the editor is fully supported on macOS, the iOS platform support makes a roaring comeback with a one-touch deployment, which uses CMake and Xcode in a Objective-C++ based integration to get the OpenGL context for GLStudio. So this will allow you to very easily, in a native way, intuitively on Mac, deploy GLStudio content to iOS simulators and real devices. So let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. So it's going to be a relatively similar workflow like all of our other packages. You add the package to the project, and then you make use of it. So let me give you a taste of that. Let's go back to our Mac. Let's go ahead and minimize this project and bring up our other project. That's going to be this nice DiSTI all-in-one demo that we have. We like to use this to show off GLStudio's performance because it's running 4 demos in one, as well as showing a bunch of different domains where GLStudio can be used. For example, we got an automotive IVI, a automotive cluster, an industrial plant monitor display, and a medical demo. So we're going to run this quad demo on iOS. We're going to use it on the iOS simulator. So up here in the top, like I've shown before, this is our deployment dropdown, and this project happens to already have the iOS deployment added to this list. But if you want to use iOS and it is not already in this list, you simply just need to go to Manage Packages. No one saw that? One moment while I restart GLStudio. You know what they say, sometimes these things happen. Go ahead and reopen this project and get back to where we left off. It is quite a big project. It is 4 demos in one after all. All right, we're back. So if your iOS deployment is not present, you can simply go in the package manager, you can search for iOS. And then like before, you will change this to a yes. Something to keep in mind in particular for the iOS deployment though, is that unlike the GUI test framework, the iOS deployment is not installed with the editor by default. So you will want to make sure that you log into your support account so that you're able to see the packages that are online and download it. You may need to go over to settings and log out. For example, I'm not logged in. So if you are not logged in, you may need to go to the settings tab and log out so that you can log in and so that you can see the iOS deployment. Then as before, you'll hit apply. It'll ask you to restart. You'll restart. So we'll pretend that we did that. And here we go. So to use the iOS deployment, you simply hit the generate button. The generate button will generate the code for the GLStudio application, and it will also use CMake to generate the Xcode project. Once you've done that, you will click on the Xcode button and it will launch the generated Xcode project in Xcode, which includes your generated code, your content, your user code that you wrote, as well as the iOS integration layer. So once you get here, there are 2 things you need to do. You need to make sure that my project, or whatever you have called your project, is selected here in this dropdown. And then you'll want to pick whichever kind of iPhone, iPod, iPad that you want to target. In this case, we're targeting this iPod Touch. So once you've done that, all you have to do is hit the run button and it will compile and run and deploy that application to an iOS simulator in this case. Excuse me. So once that's done, it will pop this up and then we should see our application running on iOS. Here we go, turn it around. And then this particular demo, if you touch a demo, it will zoom in on that demo. You hold, it will zoom out. So iOS deployments adds another tool in the toolbox. So with the exact same tool, you can now design content for more or less any embedded target, whether it be iOS, Android, Raspberry Pi, you name it. If it has an OpenGL driver, GLStudio will run on it. And you can use the exact same tool to develop content for all of those different platforms and using our deployment system. So a side note, if you're not targeting a simulator, you will need a signing certificate from Apple. That's just something that they require in order to go to a real target. There's information on that online, but if you're curious, we can get you some information to get you started. You can just send an email to support@disti.com and we can give you a rundown on what you need to do for that. So there you have it, GlsStudio on iOS. Okay, so with all that being said, just want to reiterate again, any questions that you may have, please feel free to leave them in the chat, that little Q&A button on the top toolbar. From here, I'm going to hand it over to Brandon to bring us through the rest of GlStudio 8.2's great features. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
All right, thank you, Nathan, and hello, everyone. So I'll be discussing some of the other major features we are introducing with GlStudio 8.2, starting with the best practices, workflows, videos. And do remember to leave questions in the QA section that we'll answer at the end. So, introduced with GlStudio 8.1 was the best practices workflows documentation, a comprehensive set of introductory materials to GlStudio. This documentation is designed to give you a jump start with some of the most prevalent workflows in GlStudio. These workflows are great to look at after completing a few tutorials, as they make learning GlStudio easier than ever. Now with GlStudio 8.2, we are providing accompanying videos for these workflows, which even further improves the ease of learning. So each high-level workflow category now contains a summary video for that category. Each individual workflow within a category is now accompanied by a summary video, which provides an overview of the workflow, and a tutorial video, which demonstrates the workflow in action. These videos are all accessible on the GlStudio 8.2 space on docs.disti.com, which I will now show you how to navigate to. So here we are on docs.disti.com. We'll go ahead and navigate into the GlStudio documentation, and we'll click on GlStudio 8.2 here. Here we have a table with some helpful links to lots of different articles here within our documentation. And so under the Get Started section, we have Best Practice Workflows. We'll click on that. And now we have our list of workflows here. So let's go ahead and click on one of these. I'll select the Design Iteration section. So one of the key characteristics of GlStudio is the ability to rapidly iterate on your design. And so this workflow here gives you a good look at how to take advantage of that capability. So we now have a summary video here, which will give you an overview of the workflow. And if we scroll down a little further, we have a diagram here, and then there is the example section. So we now have a video that will give you a demonstration on how to use this workflow in your project. So in this case, it'll give you an example of iterating on a design in GlStudio. So these best practice workflows and the new videos will give you a great look at some of the key workflows of GlStudio. Highly recommend taking a look at these as you start ramping up with GlStudio. Really makes learning to use GlStudio easier than ever, and you'll be on your way to creating your project in no time. So let's go ahead and jump back now. So there is the best practice workflows videos. Next thing we're going to talk about is the UiPath interactive tutorial. So with GeoStudio 8.0, we introduced interactive tutorial support in the first interactive tutorial, the HUD tutorial. What's great about interactive tutorials is that you don't need to tab back and forth with a web page or tutorial document. All of the information needed to complete the tutorial is right in the editor, and all of the materials needed are provided by the tutorial package. So now with GeoStudio 8.2, we are introducing a new UiPack interactive tutorial. This tutorial provides a comprehensive overview of the powerful widget set UI package. The widget set UI package provides 19 customizable widget objects that allow for the streamlined creation of form-style graphical user interfaces. These widgets have predefined behavior that can be dropped right into the design. So let me show you how you can complete this tutorial and be on your way to using this powerful package. So we'll go ahead and open up GeoStudio 8.2 and we'll create a new package or a new project. So let's go to File, New Project. We can use the default GLS project bundle, and then we'll just name our project. So let's do Widget Set UI Tutorial and click Create. So now we have a project and we're ready to get going. You'll notice here on the top bar that we have a few buttons pertaining to interactive tutorials. So the Select Tutorial button will allow you to select which tutorial you're doing. The default project bundle comes with the HUD tutorial, but we'll need to add in the Widget Set UI tutorial. So to do that, we'll open up the Package Manager by clicking Manage Packages. And what we can do is just search for UI, and we'll see Widget Set UI tutorial. We'll change that to yes to set it active in the project. Click Apply, and then we'll restart GeoStudio. Now the last thing we'll need to do to get going with the tutorial is to select it as the active tutorial. So we'll select Widget Set UI tutorial here and click OK. And then we'll just click the Start Tutorial button, and this will start us at the beginning of the tutorial. There is also this Continue Tutorial button, which will allow you to pick up where you left off if, for example, you get halfway through the tutorial and then you need to close out of GeoStudio and come back later. Continue Tutorial will allow you to continue where you were. So all of the information needed to complete the tutorial will now be in this doc here. So we can click Next, and we'll see we'll begin Lesson 1 here. Click Next again, and then we'll have our steps to complete the tutorial right here. So for example, this first step has us delete this wizard created object, which it has highlighted for us. You'll see that the next button is grayed out. You'll need to actually complete the steps for this page to continue on. So let's do that by deleting this object. You'll see the next button is now clickable, and we can go onward. So you'll see at this point, it's going to have us create a UI button, which can be found here in the toolbox if we scroll down. It is highlighting that for us as well. So we can select this, click in the design, and it will create a UI button, of course, allowing us to then proceed onward. You can also go backwards in the tutorial to review steps that you have previously completed, and then go back to where you were. You'll see that there are, like I mentioned, 19 widgets. Just to name a few, we have the UI button. We also have the UI dial. We have the UI text input field. And we even have some more complex objects, such as UI tree view, which will allow you to create a list of collapsible sections. So these UI widgets are really powerful if you're looking to create a graphical user interface. And this tutorial is a great place to start with learning how to use these in your design. So I would highly recommend going through this UI package tutorial here and learning how to use these widgets. Really powerful. So let's jump back now. So there you have the UiPath interactive tutorial. Next thing we're going to talk about is FlexNet publisher licensing. More specifically, we have restored FlexNet publisher licensing. So with GlStudio 8.0, FlexNet publisher licensing was replaced with FlexNet embedded. By popular demands, we are restoring FlexNet publisher for Windows and Linux with GlStudio 8.2. So for those of you who prefer FlexNet publisher, we are happy to be providing that as an option again, alongside FlexNet embedded. FlexNet embedded is still recommended for new customers interested in node-locked licenses and remains necessary for customers using GlStudio on macOS platforms. Publisher support on macOS is being considered for a future release. I'd also like to note that current customers using any version of GlStudio 8 can continue to use their current licenses and download GlStudio to start using the new features right away. Customers interested in switching licensed server products can reach out to our support team to receive an updated license. Our support team can be reached by emailing support@DiSTI.com. So we're really happy to be bringing back the option of using FlexNet Publisher. In addition to these major features, we also have numerous other improvements and bug fixes, which you can see here. I'd like to highlight a few of these. So one of those is that GlStudio now will automatically regenerate any source file that lacks an unlocked license string if you have unlocked generation available. This alleviates a situation where the license window would pop up in the case of a stale source file missing that unlocked license string. We've also revived the 3ds Max DSI exporter. This exporter streamlines the process of exporting 3ds Max content into a format that can then be easily imported into GlStudio. So bringing 3D models into GlStudio will be easier than ever. Another great improvement is that the AntiAlias checkbox feature has been implemented for most ES runtimes, although there are a few targets where it is still not available, such as iOS. Additionally, we have fixed the exit code -11 error, sometimes seen on Linux. This exit code was related to FLTK, and so now FLTK will be less picky when creating an OpenGL context. Do be sure to check out the full list of changes in GlStudio 8.2 in the changelog on docs.disti.com. And so this highlights the primary new features introduced with GlStudio 8.2, which was launched in October 2023. Just to reiterate some of the key features, there is the GUI testing framework package, the new best practices workflows videos, improved editor support on 4K monitors, UiPath interactive tutorial package, we have restored iOS platform support, and we have restored FlexNet publisher licensing. So with that, download your copy of GlStudio 8.2 today. Thanks for watching the webinar. We'll go ahead and now open up the floor to questions. So if you have any questions that you have not yet asked, be sure to put those comments in the QA section.
All right, let's go through this list and let's publish some of these. That looks good. Okay, those all look good. All right, questions. First question, which deployments have the GUI testing package available? So any deployment, any desktop or ES deployment, except for WebGL, can use the GUI testing framework. So everything from desktop to Android, Raspberry Pi to any embedded Linux deployment, it's really only WebGL where the GUI testing framework is not currently supported. We do have plans to eventually add support for safety critical deployments in a future release. That is something we are thinking about. Next question. Can tests be copied and renamed? Yes and yes. So in the test editor, there is a dedicated button for copying tests, making a copy of a test, and there's also a button that can be used to rename existing tests. Next question. If I create a test on my Mac, can I run the same test on Windows? Yes. So the tests themselves are platform independent. So you can not only can you run the same test on Mac and Windows, you can also run tests remotely. So the way the test framework works is you can run the test remotely over the network. So you can have your machine that is starting the test, say your Windows machine. You can actually have those tests be run remotely on the Mac or on any other embedded target. Because the GUI communicates with the application under test over Ethernet. So next question. If I have an older version of GLStudio, do I need a new license? The answer is it depends on how old that older version is. If you are currently using anything in the GLStudio 8 series, you do not need a new license. You can use the same license for GLStudio 8.2. If your older version of GLStudio is in the 7 series or before, yes, you will need a new license to be able to use the GLStudio 8 series. So the licenses are segregated by major version. More questions. Yep, those look good. That looks good. Good. More questions. Okay, next question. Awesome job. Thanks for the great information. Well, that's not a question, but we definitely appreciate that feedback. Thank you a lot. Next question. Can I change the colors of the UI widget pack? Yes. So the skinning in the UI widgets is fully customizable. So essentially all of the different pieces and parts of all the different UI widgets are supplied by a GLStudio file, a dedicated GLStudio file that we call a skin file for skinning. So any object within there, its textures, its colors, the sizes of things, all of that can be fully customized inside that GLS file, which allows you to essentially make the UI widget packs, the look and feel of the widget pack is fully customizable. Next question, where can I download GLStudio 8.2? You can download GLStudio 8.2 from our docs site. So that is docs.disti.com. So when you log in there, the landing page, you want to make sure you pick GLStudio. Brandon can actually show that since he's already there. So when you log in, there's a landing page that'll show GLStudio and VE Studio. You want to make sure you click on GLStudio, and then from there, you can go to the downloads that Brandon is showing right now. So that is where you download GLStudio. If you want to download any older versions of GLStudio, there's a little drop down on the left side, and you can go back in time. If you need an older version for whatever reason, you can go to one of those spaces and it's the same page. All right. Question, what is the GLStudio support email? So the GLStudio support email is support@disti.com. Yep, that. All right. Any other questions? I know there's a little bit of a delay. We don't have any questions in the queue right this second, but we'll go ahead and wait a minute or so because there is a time delay on this. So we'll give about another minute for questions, and if there aren't any, well, hopefully there are. I promise to answer any question as long as it's about GLStudio. Okay. So without there being any further questions, thank you everybody for your time. Thank you for attending. I hope that everybody found this informative and worthwhile. And please download GLStudio 8.2 today. Thank you for watching.